Imagine you are encountering a culture for the first time. You are the researcher who has made first contact with this group of people, and it so happens that they have welcomed you into their community and have allowed you to live among them. You accept their hospitality, and whenever you get the chance, you make notes about their life in this community. Everything is new to you. Their customs, their cuisine, their style of dress, and definitely their language. If you want to record the language of this new culture for posterity, you'd have to come up with a style of representing it that allows others to have an accurate description of what this language sounds like. Anthropologists call this kind of description an ethic description, an objective description that could easily be interpreted by an outsider to the culture once they understand how the description works. This is what the International Phonetic Alphabet aims to do. The IPA uses an objective method of describing all the different speech sounds identified in the world's languages. This method of representation uses labels for consonant speech sounds, which fall into the categories voicing, place, and manner. And in the case of vowel sounds, the IPA uses the labels height, fronting, rounding, and tension. Now, let's return to the scenario where you are a researcher in this new culture. You are living among the inhabitants and doing the same sorts of things that they do on a daily basis. After a while, you're no longer an outsider. You eventually become a member of this new culture. When describing the customs, cuisine, fashion, and the language, you will start to do so as an insider would, moving from a purely objective style of representation to one which is meaningful for the members of that specific community. This kind of description is called an Imemic Description. It's a description based on the perception of the community. Phonology has a lot to do with perception. While phonetics involves the study of all speech sounds and the physical characteristics of producing them, phonology is the study of how sounds are perceived in a specific language. Phonetics studies the concrete audible sounds that are produced when the articulators interact with each other, while phonology focuses on what speakers perceive those sounds to be. Consider another example involving cars. When we talk about cars, there's an abstract representation we have in our heads. We could see a car even in a crude drawing from a child because we have a basic mental representation of what a car should be. But once we move beyond the mental representation and look at real cars, they come in all sorts of varieties. These varieties are usually context dependent, and within that set there is one variety of car that we understand to be the most common kind of car. It's a variety of car with the least amount of restrictions. In this case, it would be a boring Honda CR-V. Something similar occurs with sounds. Look at this short passage. Pause the video and read it aloud to yourself in a normal speaking voice. You would have noticed that the letter T appears several times in the passage, but it wasn't always pronounced as the voiceless alveolar plosive. In fact, we could identify 5 different variants of T in that passage. There's a T sound that you hear in the word stop. There's a T sound in the word to, which is aspirated because it occurs as the first sound in the syllable. Aspirated just means that there is an extra puff of air after the consonant when it occurs at the start of a word, or the first sound in a stressed syllable. There's also a T sound in the word but, which sounds like an unreleased plosive. But this T happens when it's the final sound in the word. Then there's the T sound, which actually comes out as a D or D when occurring before the L sound, L. And finally, there's a T sound which comes out as what's called a glottal stop. This happens when it's next to the N sound in the final syllable of a word. If all this seems unusual or surprising, the crucial thing to remember is that even though what you perceive at the mental level is the T sound, what comes out doesn't always sound like T, the voiceless alveolar plosive, because of the context or the phonetic environment. Just as how context will determine if you see a sports car or an antique car, so it is that context can determine whether the abstract T gets realized as an aspirated T or even a D or D. Now, going back to the example with the T sound, which one of these realizations of T do you think is the boring old Honda CR-V? It's the one with the least amount of restrictions. All of the other variants have specific phonetic environments for their realization, but one of them occurs everywhere else. All of these variants are allophones of the T sound, and the variant with the least amount of restrictions serves as the phoneme. So I suppose I don't have to tell you that the etic and emic descriptions from anthropology correspond with the phonetic and phonemic analysis in linguistics. Both are connected and represent a gradual transition from objective to subjective analysis. This is a crucial feature of linguistic research and will be implicated in several other areas to come.